Do you want to create awesome laser engraving and cutting projects but just don't know where to start? In this video, I'm going to go through an example that uses both engraving and cutting in a single project. So you can also make cool stuff in your garage with your laser engraver and cutter. So be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And without any further waiting, let's get into the video. Here at Imprint Manufacturing headquarters, my top secret location tends to get frequent salesmen ringing my doorbell and interrupting my peace. Well, not anymore. I'm going to use my laser engraver and cutter to make a sign to ward off these salesmen from ever approaching. What's the first step? In most cases, you will need to create your file that is going to be programmed for engraving and cutting. Engraving is done first, and engraving needs to be a PNG file extension, while cutting will be done second and needs to be an SVG file. Luckily, there is a software that can do both. I use a free software called Inkscape to create these files, and I did say free. On the Inkscape website, click the download tab at the top of the page. From there, select the operating system you have on your computer. I use Windows, and for Windows, select the 64-bit. Lastly, select the installation method of your choice. Here is Inkscape with a blank sheet. One tip I use, instead of creating my settings every time, I use a template that is designed for my laser's bed dimensions. To do this, you will need to create a new template first. Go to the Files tab at the top and go down to the Document Settings. A pop-up menu will appear, and in this menu, you will set your units to be millimeters. Then adjust the width and the height of the document so that it will match that of your laser cutter's bed. You can see mine has 410 millimeters in the width by 400 millimeters in the height to match my laser cutter. Once you're done with your settings, go to the File tab again and scroll down to Save Template. Enter a title that you will remember. I use the name of the laser cutter to make it easy, and fill out the remaining lines and hit save. After you save your template, you will now be able to go to File, hit New from Template, and find the template for your laser cutter and click on it to begin creating a file with these settings. Alright, let's keep this tutorial moving forward and mainly focused on the laser cutting and engraving. I do make all my files in Inkscape and will point out what I do to be successful, but this isn't going to be a how to use Inkscape video. There's other people that do that better, and you can find them on YouTube if you need help creating your file in Inkscape. I'm going to mainly focus on how to create your files for engraving and cutting and some tips and tricks to do this. The first thing to notice is where I'm starting the cut or the placement of my sign. The outer shape or line of my sign is near the bottom left corner of Inkscape. The program Inkscape defines this corner as the origin or 00 or your home on the laser. And as you move up, the closer to the height max of your laser bed, you're going to get closer to. Mine is 400 millimeters. As you move to the right, you will get closer to the width max of your laser bed. In my case, again, it's 410 millimeters. I use the red lines to show cut lines, and the yellow will be engravings. I'm going to also show you that you should best practice put these on 2 separate layers. Inkscape does have some published instructions for what I'm talking about in this video, and in particular, I want to talk about line thickness or the fill and stroke feature of an object. Inkscape says to use a line thickness of 0.5 points or greater, and it will be engraved, while a line of 0.2 points thickness will be cut. I use this as a good recommendation while I'm programming. However, it's worth noting LaserGRBL cannot read line thicknesses in a single file and know what to do with them. LaserGRB rather uses file extensions like .svg or PNG to know whether to perform a cut or an engrave. That's why I mentioned putting all cuts on a single layer and engraving on another layer, so it makes exporting a little bit easier. Also, you could have an example where you have multiple cut files. If you had a mounting hole you wanted to be done on the interior of the sign before the main cutout, I would separate these cuts from each other and having them on their own SVG file. Now let's say you finished your design and your sign is looking really good. You separated your cut and your engravings as shown, and red for cut, yellow for engraving, and now you are needing to export this file. Well, each operation like cut, engrave needs to have its own file, and you must remove all layers that are not being used. For example, if I have a cut file, there can be no engraving layers on the file because, as I've learned, if you simply try to hide a layer and then export your SVG file, these hidden layers still get exported and show up on your SVG cut file, and your laser will try to cut everything out. It's a nightmare and ruins everything, so just trust me on that. Remove it, delete it.
And that worked?
No, not at all.
In my example, I'm going to delete the cut layer, so I'm only left with the engraving image. Be sure as you're editing your file after you've completed it not to save any of the deletions, because we're going to still need to come back to the cut layer. Now go to Export, File Export. A pop-up menu will appear, and I will change the DPI to be 300. You will see the image size that is being exported will now match the width and the height of my laser cutter bed. That's usually a good sign, no pun intended. As discussed in previous videos, if you have any scaling issues of your image. Hit OK to export. This will generate the image to engrave as a PNG file in the location you've specified. Now, as I mentioned, don't save this change. Exit out of your file because we're going to need the cut line. Now reopen the file and you should have all the layers still there. Now you're going to delete the engraving layer. With only the main cut line left, simply save as this file and name it like main sign cutout or sign main cutout, something like that. Just have main cutout in the title so you can easily find it. If you had internal holes, you would also create a file the same way as I just showed you with these holes as the only layer and have a separate file to run before the main cutout. We can look at the SGV cut file in the web browser and we will only see the sign's main cutout. So that's good. While when I open the engraving image, the PNG that I just exported, you will also see what I wanted to be engraved as a picture. So everything is looking good and we are now ready to move on to the LaserGRBL part. Before we begin, we must know our material we are working with. I'm using some hardwood from my local Lowe's, and we need to develop the settings for the engraving. The simplest method is to look up the stock settings for your laser and test on a scrap piece of wood to see how it's going to look. In LaserGRBL, go to File, Material Database, and here you will find the recommended settings for the laser cutter and the type of material you are wishing to engrave. It's a good place to start if you don't know your settings or you're engraving a material for the first time. Again, use a scrap piece of similar material that you are wishing to engrave and make adjustments as needed. Since I've done a lot of cutting and engraving, I know my engraving settings for this material and have tested it out extensively, so I'm going to use my settings. Also, make sure the laser is properly set to the correct height from the material. The owner's manual for your laser should tell you how to do this. We are going to load the engraving image first, so open up the PNG image we created for the sign. My settings, which will differ from yours depending on how your test settings went. My image brightness I set to 75%, the quality I set to 20 lines per minute. Then I hit next and I click on the box to load the engraving settings per my material and laser cutter, basically pulling from that material database we looked at earlier. I did do some adjustments, so engraving speed at 3000 millimeters per minute stays the same, and I changed my settings for power to be 600 or 60%. I hit create to generate the file from these settings. Then the last thing to do is connect your laser and hit run. Now we have to load the cut file in LaserGRBL after the engraving is done. So open up the cut file. Again, click on this box on the right side of this little pop-up menu to load the cut settings per our material. Now, cutting also depends on the thickness you are planning to cut through, so be careful you're selecting the right one. I've been playing with the power settings just to see if I could reduce any burnings I might see, so that's why I dropped the power down to 90% or 900. Hit create, so LaserGRBL will generate the preview. The only remaining setting left to change will be the number of passes or the number of times the cut file will run. I usually change this to be 3, and you do that here. Before you hit the green play button, always make sure the laser did indeed return home. Here's the finished sign, all propped up and ready to scare away any salesman that approach Imprint headquarters, and I can now go back to ignoring them. Thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, please leave a like and comment below any laser cutting or engraving projects you are currently working on. Check out my links, which are listed in the description of this one. I hope your laser cutting and engraving turns out awesome, and I'll see you all in the next video.